I need Massmart to really pull the trigger on acquiring us because we are running out of money. I've already used two F&B personal loans to pay salaries, and I'm pretty sure that F&B is going to close my account if I try to go for a third.
So, do you think there's opportunity for founders to actually look at larger companies and see examples of how some of their peers are doing it overseas and then using that as a way to leverage into a corporate potentially for acquisition?
What's up, builders? My name's Bobby.
And I'm Renier, and this is How Would You Build It, a podcast where we interview South African startup founders, business builders, and tech innovators.
And if you like our content, make sure to hit that subscribe, follow us for more, and we'll make sure to bring you the best interviews, unique insights to help you build better and stay ahead. Enjoy the show. Welcome, builders, to another episode of How Would You Build It? And I think the word excited sometimes gets a bit overused, but I really am excited for today's episode for a number of reasons. But we've got the Wumdrop founder with us, or co-founder. So we're really excited to get into that story and obviously other things that he's been up to since Wumdrop. But before we dive into that, my co-host, Renier, as always, how are you doing?
Great, Bobby. Good to be here. Nice to see the podcast out in the public. Season 2, we're on our way. So I'm excited for the chat today.
Oh, awesome. Agreed. Can't agree with more. The stories are always motivating and inspirational. And I think today we're going to have just another one of those. So Simon, thank you for joining. Thanks for agreeing to join. How would you build it? How are you doing today?
Very good. Thank you. Excited, thrilled, exuberant, ebullient. Extremely happy to be here. Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you. I'm going to start stealing some of those adjectives for future episodes. But Simon, like we mentioned just before we clicked the record button, you've been, chatting about Wumdrop for quite a while, but nonetheless, it's quite a great story. I mean, you guys did last mile delivery before last mile delivery was even things that people spoke about, and you've got quite a cool story there. You exited and all of that. So there's quite a thing to go in there. I don't think we need to go into the founding story because I mean I think you've shared it that it started with diapers and kind of you started figuring out the market fit for it for your business, but just maybe get into some of the highlights from those early stages of starting Wumdrop and getting that traction and what I do want to dive into is that your obsession with customers and user experience and customer experience. But yeah, just share that early stages for us, how starting the company.
Cool. This might be a little bit scattershot because I'm just riddled with ADHD. So my story brain loves to start at like the very beginning and then just like pull it out. So to start not at the complete beginning means that if this comes out in bit pieces, it's Bobby's fault and not mine.
I'll take it. I'm also a bit ADD, so it's good.
So something actually I've been thinking about recently and haven't talked about a lot publicly, which I really love. Such a cool detail of the early days when we were transitioning from diapers, when we figured out that oh my word, the delivery experience is the thing that matters to these people. And so, we have to take control back of the delivery experience when we're delivering the diapers. When we progressed from that to understanding that actually the delivery experience is the problem for most companies, and therefore we should pivot to being a delivery company. When we started the diaper business, we decided to sell diapers because we were pretty sure that we were going to fail. We were highly ambitious. We wanted to start our own business, and we knew that we wanted to make an amount of money that having a salary wouldn't give us, especially not working in media in Cape Town as a like less than 25-year-old. So highly ambitious, but also probably a function of both being Roy and I both being smart kids and both being not the eldest child in our family. We were also kind of fundamentally lazy, and I don't necessarily. I mean, no, I like saying that with a smirk, but it's not really a good thing. It's classically youngest child thing to say that with a smirk. But we were fundamentally lazy, really, if we're honest with ourselves. So the reason why we chose diapers is because when this business fails, we wanted to be able to parse about, what information was pointing to why we failed. And we didn't want to have 50% of the variables involved, which is product market fit. We wanted to look at our execution. So we chose something that already had a market. Similarly, when we decided to pivot to deliveries, we're too lazy to go back to study logistics, which would have been the wise thing to do. We felt like we neither had the time, nor the money, nor frankly, the gees to go and do it. We figured, okay, similarly to how we decided we'd sell diapers, how can we learn on the job to do deliveries, specifically final mile deliveries? Even though we didn't have any logistics experience, what we were was very highly qualified consumers. Roy and I loved to eat stuff very enthusiastically, often to my physical detriment, including cheese and carbohydrates, usually combined, heated and melted. Beautiful combo. And yeah, and we knew from extensive testing throughout our lives with regards to pizza and transport of it towards us, that when things go well, the pizza arrives and the crust is crispy and hot and the cheese is melted. But when things go badly, the cheese coagulates and gets hard and the crust becomes soggy, thanks to an enemy called steam. And that's a function of obviously the packaging, but it's very tough for pizza companies to invest in kind of steam-proof packaging. So it's also really a function of time for the unit economics to work. Okay, so we know that there's a real life kind of test for being able to deliver something on time. It's called a pizza. What else is made of carbohydrates and cheese? Because making pizzas is complicated and requires some really hot fire. Well, grilled cheese sandwiches, which we were also very interested in A/B testing on a regular basis from various outlets. We knew that would provide the same result. So we spun up something called the Grilled Cheese Club, which was, it's one of those random things where, like, if you hear about, oh, do you? Okay, cool. I was going to say, because if you remember it, generally, like, people are enthusiastic about it. Yeah.
That's the OG test.
Exactly.
If you knew about these guys, and if you were upset that they didn't deliver in Technopark Stellenbosch, and that the business just disappeared at some point, then you've been around.
Wow, weird. Okay, yeah, no, we definitely didn't deliver to Technopark. Yeah, so Renier would have had an experience where he would have seen this thing where you can tweet to order a grilled cheese sandwich, and then this company responds and delivers a grilled cheese sandwich to you. But it was an extremely limited area because Roy and I were not going to drive from Woodstock to Stellenbosch to do this for the sake of learning and testing, and we weren't going to try to spin up multiple production kitchens. So we did, and we got to 1,000 grilled cheese sandwiches each. And at that point, we decided we knew enough about delivering sandwiches. But we got a couple of our first delivery guys. So it was first Superette in Woodstock in the Woodstock Exchange, and then Society Bistro got involved at one point, and we had one other production kitchen. I think it was like the cafe around the corner from Woodstock Exchange. We're making the very, very kind of cheap and cheerful, delicious American cheese white bread ones. I love those. We got to 1,000 grilled cheese sandwiches each, decided that we knew how to do deliveries. And that was actually when Wumdrop was formally launched. So often when I tell the story, we say, oh, we went from diapers to deliveries, but really we went from diapers to grilled cheeses to deliveries. And the two cool kind of art things that came out of that, a grilled cheese sandwich was my first tattoo that I ever got, and maybe able to kind of see that things have progressed fairly drastically from there. But it was the first one. It was the first one that I got. And the other thing is, I don't know if you remember Lorraine Lewitz, an artist, doing like objects for ants. She was well, I think still does, produces paintings, really, really tiny thing. Yeah. I delivered a grilled cheese sandwich to her during that time, and in her first year of doing it, the grilled cheese sandwich was one of the that grilled cheese was one of the paintings that she did, and I managed to get the original, and that's at my place in Hoedspruit.
Really?
That's the grilled cheese sandwich painting in the entrance. Yeah.
I remember seeing that name. I was like, when you said the name, I was like, I've definitely, but it was from the paintings. Okay, we'll have to share the side story to the audience later.
Yeah. So I'm stoked not only that I have an original Lorraine Lewitz, but also that it's of a grilled cheese sandwich that I delivered to her. And that's actually really how I want.
So Simon, it just sounds like you're one of those natural, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I mean, Renier, a lot of these people we bring on, it's just like this is what they were always meant to be.
Hey founders, building a startup can be quite lonely. You've got a big vision, no playbook, and let's be honest, your friends don't really get what you're trying to do. But that's where the Founder Collab comes in. It's a private community for early stage founders in South Africa, a space to connect, ask questions, share wins, and get unstuck faster. Whether you're pre-product, post-revenue, or pivoting like a pro, there's someone in the collab who has done it before and ready to help. The best part, it's action orientated. No fluff, just weekly meetups, intros that matter, and the kind of support you cannot Google. So if you're tired of building alone, come and build with us at the Founder Collab. Check out www.thefoundercollab.com. That's www.thefoundercollab.com. Let's build together. But I love how it's a non-logical flow, right, Simon? I mean, it's not, the logical thing for people is you want to go into logistics, go study logistics, go do a course, go read a book, go speak to other people who do it, right? But then I love what you guys said is like, what is the best way to actually practically learn how to do it? And I'm convinced that could have been a company on its own to this day. I would have ordered, like, if you delivered in Stellenbosch, you made those sandwiches look beautiful on Twitter, and but I love that, because that's just like, let's just get into it and learn it, because you're not going to learn practically what it's like to deliver something in Woodstock by reading a book. Like, it's not going to work.
Yeah, no, like, I'm just kind of synthesizing both things that you both just said respectively, because maybe I'm a natural entrepreneur, but to Renee's point, it is also not logical what we did. I have an impulse more towards chaos is maybe too strong a word, but impulse towards creativity rather than logic. And out of that, cool things can and do happen, because they're original is also a strong word, but they're maybe more different than what other people are doing, and maybe that catches kind of a hook of what's wanted or needed at the time. But you should see my notebooks. Like 90% of what I write down is complete dreck, and 10% is great and becomes something cool. But there's a lot more sort of creative production of stuff that just gets left behind than stuff that turns into something actual, real, and interesting. So maybe, but really what I wanted to be when I was a little kid was a game ranger. I was obsessed with Mazda Wildlife on One. I used to scream into the living room when that was being aired. I went to the bush a lot when I was a little kid. I had family that worked as game wardens in Botswana and Zimbabwe. And that's really what I wanted to be. And my move into writing was really a function of the fact that I needed to earn my own money as a teenager, and that was an easy way for me to do it. And I was aping my older cousin, Will, who was very much like a senior kind of male figure in my life, and still is. And he was a great writer, still is a great writer. But I think I accidentally stumbled across a creative outlet there, and the creativity of being able to write definitely helps with these experiments, like going to market on Twitter, which is a fundamentally word platform. Like if I had been a less creative, chaotic, wordy person, launching this practical learning opportunity for delivering cheese sandwiches on Twitter wouldn't have worked as well if I hadn't been able to fire out a good tweet, which I think I was. And I would love to still be on Twitter, but I don't have time to waste fighting with people.
That's what it's become.
That's what it's become. I mean, it used to be a place where you can buy grilled cheese sandwiches. Now it's just a place where you get into fights.
What has become?
Such a valid point, eh?
Yeah.
So Simon, doing a bit of research, you were quite innovative with Wumdrop from a technology point of view. If my research is correct, you were sort of at the front of actually using pins, so not addresses, but pins for delivery. And I think we take it for granted now that on WhatsApp, you can just be like, yo, here's my location. I mean, it's now just normal. That's just how even our parents are used to this technology. But we don't realize that 5, 6, 7 years ago, that wasn't a thing at all. So how were you guys front running that sort of thinking and using that technology for logistics in this case?
Firstly, credit for that must go entirely to our CTO at the time, Wilson Kanda, and our head of testing, Zukile Nkazela. So that was 2016. It was 2016. Also, sorry if anyone's watching this, but I didn't close my curtains properly, and this is a west-facing apartment, so the sun's going to rise over my face for the rest of this podcast. Anyway,
you're gonna light it up.
Yeah, thank you. I'll flow. It was 2016. And yes, absolutely. You know, like WhatsApp didn't have a dropped pin function at the time, and certainly didn't have a follow my live location function, which, you know, thank God it does now. And secondly, with regards to final mile and transport management software, it was still extremely early days for any kind of TMS or final mile software to be fit for purpose for the South African environment. So we have an extremely weird spatial environment in South Africa because of the Group Areas Act. So you have these things that we call townships kind of thrown up against really formal spaces, you know, like highly planned, well-built spaces, and then really kind of crack out a short left and you're in something that's completely unplanned because people sort of like thrown there just to chill without any kind of consideration other than building a main street that was wide enough for a Casper to go down. That was like the only planning. And if you're delivering final mile in South Africa now, you know, there are consumers both in townships and in not townships. And that means that you have to get to both spaces. And so that's all context for why we even had a dev team in the first place. Because if I was starting this business again now, there's lots of off-the-shelf software, specifically coming from India, which has very similar spatial kind of foibles that we do. You could buy software off the shelf now, but we had to build our own proprietary software because stuff off the shelf just wasn't fit for purpose to be able to navigate spaces where you go from formal addresses to not in the same delivery run, and you have to make that work. So that's why we had a dev team. And that meant that we were able to build things that were extremely novel for this space. Now, 2016, we're now 2 years since the pivoting from grilled cheese to deliveries. And because of the fact that we were ignorant founders and incompetent in many important areas, including financial projections and also kind of market research, we had pitched to a bunch of angel investors who were enthusiastic about the idea of us being essentially Uber for deliveries, more of a consumer-facing business, and financial projections wise, that we would all be really rich and retired on the beach in Zanzibar by the time we were 30. We weren't lying, we were extremely wrong. And it became apparent that we were wrong pretty quickly because we learned about the unit economics, we learned about the spatial dynamics, and it became apparent that this is a high volume, low margin business. And so they naturally became less interested because this wasn't the thing that they were betting on. You add in the fact that you have to build your own proprietary tech, and even then, even if you have convinced people that this is an important mission and you are paying them more in meaning than in money, because our developers were radically underpaid relative to market rates because of the fact that we hadn't raised enough money. Even with that, it's still expensive. You know, like our developers were still getting paid, even though they're getting paid a pittance, they're getting paid 3 times more per person than Roy and I were paying ourselves. So burn rate extremely high relative to what we raised. So we're in the dwang. Our angel investors are not interested in following on anymore. We're running out of money, and we need to find somebody to acquire us. Similarly, Roy, to compound the pain, has left the business as of the end of 2015, beginning of 2016. He didn't want the pain anymore, which I was really angry with him at the time, but now I get, and we're cool. But that's really hard to raise money in that scenario. So we needed something special, and I said as much to the team. Wilson and Zakile brainstormed this novel idea about what if we have these special issues, addresses are an issue in South Africa, what if we could deliver to a person instead of an address? And they figured out a way to do that. It was obviously, it wasn't perfect, and it involved somebody needing to keep their browser open while it happened. But this was 2016, and we could deliver to somebody's phone in real time, and they could also move dynamically, and it could still happen. And the guys produced this in about 5 weeks solidly, and we went to market to look for who we could test this with. At the time, Massmart was beginning to become interested in us as an acquisition target, and we thought the one smart idea I had was, okay, I need Massmart to really pull the trigger on acquiring us because we are running out of money. I've already used 2 F&B personal loans to pay salaries, and I'm pretty sure that F&B is going to close my accounts if I try to go for a third. So we need some working capital here urgently. how can I find a way to get them to close this deal quickly? And the best way to do that is obviously to create leverage, create excitement, but also create a little bit of anxiety and potential FOMO. So I figured, okay, another retailer trialing this will be a good idea, even if they're not at all interested in acquiring us as a business. And the best retailer will be a retailer that is a retailer, but is not necessarily a direct competitor, so that they see enough of a, another retailer who is a direct competitor could use this, but at least these guys aren't. And so no major damage has been done. And the Foschini group was the perfect candidate. And they were flipping awesome. They were enthusiastic. They threw a lot of marketing collateral behind it, produced some great videos, and a really wonderful press release. And we went to market with this as a TFG exclusive function. Worked really well, both as a way to increase our first-time delivery accuracy, so our unit economics became much better, which improved our cash position. But importantly, it also, I think, was one of the major things that pushed Massmart across the line. And they started giving us working capital as we began to work towards finalizing a deal, which I signed personal surety for, but that felt like a much better option than taking another third F&B personal loan.
Simon, if I may just quickly ask, how did you get into the door with the likes of Massmart and Foschini Group, especially someone like Foschini Group, that anyone that's dealt with them in the corporate world knows that there is tons of red tape to get through the door. So can you is there any lessons there for someone that's like, how can I get into the space of a Foschini Group and say, here's my thing, would you be willing to look into it? How did you get that?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, in our case, we got extremely lucky with the cohort of leadership that was in the Foschini Group at the time and what was happening in their business at the time. Okay. They were, I think, either in the midst of developing or had just launched their new e-commerce offering, which was, I think the thesis was that they were taking individual sites and breaking them down into one kind of Foschini Group home with essentially, department labels, which was a big bet. It's a very different space, which means that there was a lot of energy and froth and kind of newness and willingness to do stuff in TFG at the time. And so I think we caught that wave. And so that exceptional lack of timing at the right leaders who backed this idea and put it forward and were brave enough to do it were in there at the time. With Massmart, I can't give any. So maybe the advice there is consider the fact that there are in every company, there are, like in the world, there are moments that happen, cultural moments, and you as a founder, part of your job is to be attuned to them. Firstly, not only for product market fit, but also for kind of figuring out opportunity. And it's obviously there's the macro kind of cultural moment, but companies also have their own cultural moments that are sometimes discrete from that. Sometimes companies are in a bout of depression. Like I use the phrase corporate depression all the time. Companies can get it. It's a thing. There can be green shoots and excitement. There can be moments of innovation. So be attuned to that. Keep an eye on that, both in terms of potential competition, but also opportunities. Then, so that's me, trying to be helpful to your listeners. The less helpful thing that I can say with regards to Massmart is that we got dead lucky. We were on the bones of our bets, as I kind of previously illustrated. I was essentially doing major client care visits on a weekly basis, essentially begging people. Well, not begging, but I guess they would have been able to see the fear in my eyes. Like, please don't fire us, clients. We'll be so nice to you. We'll be such good boys. Like, please. And so I was literally doing site visits with all of our clients, probably almost to the point of me being weird. But I was at SA Florist at their office on one of these. Is there anything that you need? Are you happy? Kind of things. And I got lucky in as much as a guy happened to be in the office at the same time. A guy called Colin Fleming, who happened to be the head of Massmart's e-commerce, which in 2016, in the mid-2016, meant that he had one report, essentially. And so he, as somebody who was essentially or de facto on the exco, but without any real kind of political or actual resource power in that business, was looking for ways to spark something from nothing with Massmart e-commerce. And so he was directionally, even if the timing was slightly early, directionally right in that he was looking at marketplace technology, because his thesis was that marketplaces would become the profitable center of e-commerce in South Africa, and time has proven that they're correct. And so SA Florist, as a business that was decentralized, the kind of inverse of the net florist vertical supply chain, had marketplace technology that he was interested in possibly acquiring or licensing. And when I was in the office, I think I probably told him about grilled cheese or something, and he liked the cut of my jib. Went back to Massmart Expo, pitched us to them as an acquisition. They laughed him out the room. But got lucky again. This is almost kind of uncanny. The Massmart Expo went to the Walmart shareholders conference, as they do every year, and I think it must have been in June. And a guy had a lot of airtime at that particular conference. His name was Sylvester John, and he had a lot of airtime because he had started something in Walmart called Walmart Spark, which was exactly the same model as Wumdrop and owned entirely, kind of made from within Walmart. And it was proving to be a bulwark against Amazon, and was working because they got to own the customer experience with delivery. And so he got a lot of airtime. And so they came back to South Africa going like, oh, jeepers, actually, maybe this is the thing. And maybe this is the thing that if we get into this, maybe Walmart will be happy with us, and we can probably take some of the pressure that Walmart's putting on us off. Because post Grant Patterson, CEO who did the acquisition deal with Walmart with Massmart, had a new CEO and new management, and the share price was not going above what Walmart bought it for. So Walmart obviously not happy with that. And so they came back and were interested in acquiring us. Then combination with the TFG thing put us over. And so that was August 2016, on my birthday, 4th of November 2016, they called me to Macro Cape Gate of all places, and they said the deal's on. And then paperwork obviously kind of slow over the festive period, especially because Massmart's year end is on the 31st of December, apparently because they hate accountants. Yeah, I don't know why. Yeah. And so the actual deal got signed, I think, on the 7th of February or something, 2017.
Nice. So Simon, you actually touched on two things there, which I just want to revisit because I think it's really important for founders. I'll start with the second one first. Typically when you deal with corporates, they don't want to innovate because there's risk involved, right? So you're not going to get fired for buying SAP, but if you buy some local ERP thing, it's up and coming, and it doesn't work, you have problems. Like, you're going to get fired, right? And I think the story you shared kind of illustrates that, because they were going, this is a local, respectfully scrappy startup in South Africa. I'm going to get fired if I buy this. But then there was an example. They came back from this international conference and they're like, it's okay to buy something like that because the mothership did it and it worked okay. This is my big shot. The person sitting in corporate going, this is my shot. I'm going to replicate what they did. And if it goes south, then I'm just going to say, well, I just did what you guys did. Like, it's fascinating. So do you think there's opportunity for founders to actually look at larger companies and see examples of how, some of their peers are doing it overseas, and then using that as a way to leverage into a corporate, potentially for acquisition?
Such a good question. So I think the folks, yeah, definitely the incentives are as you've described them. Like you aren't going to get fired if you do the thing that everybody has agreed is, the sensible and wise thing, like going with an approved vendor that's been working with them for 10 years, whatever the case might be. The other aspect of it is that capital is really expensive in South Africa, and so the risk of failure, or the risk of making an expenditure that doesn't pay off, it is radically higher in South Africa. Like, it's more expensive to borrow. Cash flow is tighter. Our consumer base is less. The entire engine, there's less money sloshing around. So to some extent, in the States, yes, they do have a long cultural history of taking big swings. They have an illogically low risk tolerance. And that means they take big bets. And so culturally, there's less of an issue with anybody acquiring a startup or doing something innovative inside a business and taking risk. Because if it fails, they have a lot of cultural examples of that, of failure being a good thing. Like Silicon Valley is this, I mean, just quite apart from the economic engine, it is literally, it's a culture maker, you know, and we don't talk about that enough. It changes the brain chemistry of the country in a way. And we don't have that here. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, obviously, because that engine brings its own kind of momentum. So yes, capital is more expensive here, but I don't think people are thinking about it quite as consciously as that. I think the result of capital being expensive just means that people are more risk averse, but then new folks that come into a company and see that a company is risk averse just get baked in, and they don't necessarily know it's because capital is expensive. So the answer to that is twofold. One, we do need to push back on, as corporate South Africa, push back on this culture that we have of being highly risk averse, because we aren't thinking from first principles. We're just reacting to a culture that we've been baked into. And there's probably a higher ceiling of risk than what we're adopting culturally. But secondly, do also acknowledge that the culture of, that the ceiling of risk will always be lower than in a place where capital is cheaper anyway. So as a founder, there's wiggle room, and it's about your storytelling and your ability to de-risk it in the storytelling, and also to show utility and quick return. And, you know, we didn't actually figure that out very quickly enough in Wumdrop when we got acquired. We were getting our butts kicked inside Massmart. I was having this whiplash where, you know, I'd gotten this signal that I was a very special boy, and, you know, we were this good thing that they had bought. And I couldn't for the life of me figure out why I didn't get a triumphal parade on 16 Peltier Drive into, you know, the 6-story building, and why I didn't have a laurel put on my head and have money thrown at me endlessly. And we were treated like a vendor. And that meant that we had our costs really incredibly toughly scrutinized. We didn't have capital offered to us very easily. And we, importantly, didn't have volume given to us by Massmart. That's a function of, and that I think is a function of two things. The first thing is that Massmart didn't buy us for enough money to have any kind of clear strategic idea about why they bought us. And certainly not a big enough strategic idea that would have required sponsorship or alignment from everybody inside the business before they did it. And so we arrived, and people were like, well, I'm busy with my day job. Like, the quantity of lettuce that I have to order in the next half an hour is like 4 times your cap table. So please leave me alone. And then secondly, we also had failure, and as much as we just, it sounds insane, but we didn't wonder why they bought us. That's certainly not enough. So we didn't arrive there with enough value to add. And it was only when we went through a Wumdrop board member from Macro who got put onto our board, a guy called Dean Bauer. It was only through Dean Bauer at Macro when we began to get, he saw the value of the business, the potential of it. When we began to get large parcel volume from Massmart, firstly, that improved our financial position a heck of a lot. But secondly, it also improved Massmart's financial position a heck of a lot, because by a stroke of luck, we had never developed hubs, which meant we developed software to deliver point to point, which means we delivered those things more cheaply, but also at a higher margin in real rand terms than the incumbent delivery companies that did the same deliveries. So it was a win-win-win all around. Also, customer satisfaction went way up. But the penny finally dropped that, okay, actually we get further inside this corporate when we solve problems for their customers and make them money. And my word, I know that is the most elementary thing to say, but somehow I'm smart enough to have had my business acquired by Massmart, but can have a brain fade like that. And so I suppose some other people might not be immune to it. Like, you must go into the new environment keenly aware of how you will be indispensable. And if you feel like you aren't, make moves to become indispensable, because it is not guaranteed that in the new environment you will be. And if you're irrelevant, you don't get budget. And if you don't get budget, you die. If not quickly, then slowly. Both are bad.
And it's almost a function of you not getting attention or focus. And that's almost worse. Because, I mean, that goes hand in hand with budget. But that's almost worse, because then you can't get anything done.
Yeah, and that was the case for us. And as I said, it was partly because this giant corporation didn't have an idea really of why it bought us, not a really clear one. But it was really our failing for not lobbying for ourselves very clearly and demonstrating value as quickly as possible. And once we'd figured that out, things changed for the better radically in terms of focus, attention, budget, leeway, and ability to innovate inside the business, being given permission because you're no longer seen as risk. Because believe it or not, it was even sometimes a task to explain to people that if you spend, even though we are cheaper than the incumbent delivery company that you're using, even then people are like, oh, I don't know if we want to use you. Explain to them that if you spend R1 on this, although it's circular, like you're not spinning around outside of this thing. So on the global P&L basis, the money still lands back at it was amazing that we even had to explain that, but we thought that would be a given in terms of understanding, but it's not, because these corporations are made of hundreds of thousands of people and they're dealing with their own stuff.
Their own targets. So that's not on their target. So not their problem.
Yeah, you shouldn't assume that because you've landed in a corporate that suddenly, you're at center stage. You're absolutely not. Imagine that you're in a family and you're the youngest child, but there are 100,000 siblings above you, and then proceed from there.
Yeah, and they can all do the other special things. So what's interesting, because being exposed to corporate, the speed of things, the lack of innovation that's throttled completely. How do you keep your team motivated that you bring through the door that with you? I mean, when you're coming from a very different environment, surely it was fast, it was innovative. I mean, you mentioned earlier about spinning something up in 5 weeks, releasing it, and getting feedback. And then all of a sudden, I would assume that you walked into Massmart and it was like, how do you keep your team focused and motivated and in it to win it?
We were I'm going to try to think this through and hopefully come out with a nugget that's applicable to everybody. But in our context, how we got through it was we got lucky in that we remained a market-facing business. We weren't purely internalized. And the rationale for that was the unit economics. So in any kind of two-sided marketplace, you need to balance both, obviously, supply and demand. And in the case of deliveries, you're dealing with something that we coin density, which is a function of not only space where parcels are originating from and going to, but also of time. So the same street at 8 a.m. will have a very different volume profile at 11 a.m. when parcels have dispatched from there and things are going out and going into routes. Even if Walmart had landed in South Africa and given Massmart 20 billion rand and said, please destroy all other opposition, etc., we still wouldn't have had great unit economics, because actually the larger business gets, the more optimized the dispatch processes become and more concentrated, which means that we would have been dispatching from very particular places at very particular times and not broadly. And what we needed was for when a driver had gotten from point A to point B, for them to have something to collect at point B while also moving on to point C. And for that to happen, you need to knit in origination points that are exclusive from the original one. And that normally means you have to interface with other entities. And what that means in human English is we needed more than one customer. And so for that reason, we were allowed to stay as a separate entity, even if we were majority owned. So we were a separate legal entity.
You still had your branding and everything, Wumdrop, and you were able to go and source different customers, provide the same service. And they didn't restrict you from doing that. It was its own business, but you could just help the corporate in their demand and in their needs, but you were still able to do your thing on the side.
There were definitely relatively regular tough conversations with senior leaders who didn't understand why we might want to service a non-Massmart hardware store, and then we'd explain how the economics work, and they would be cool with it. And so we were, to that extent, allowed to go at our own pace and to continue trying to grow in the market. The challenging part was getting the capital investment to be able to accelerate growth, particularly around technology development, because we were still in a space where we needed to build our own proprietary tech. And that was a very, 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 very hard fight, which I think probably took about 2 years after we got acquired to get any kind of meaningful investment. And when we did, it paid off, thank God, because that meant that there was credibility and proof that an investment in the business would work out, and that it would result in growth, and it would be paid back relatively quickly. So if I can try to synthesize this into advice for people, generally speaking, yeah, the change of pace can be brutal and can be crippling. How you might be able to retain it is firstly being thoughtful about your legal structure. It's cool if somebody owns you, but I always argue, I think especially if you're trying to merge over time a new startup into a larger organization, I would vouch strongly for keeping a separate legal entity and have a plan probably over 3 to 4 years to dissolve it into a division and keep it market facing until that time. And then secondly, that allows you to retain the why, obviously, of your business, the separate motivating factor, the vision and aspiration of your small business, which is why the people who currently work in the startup work there in the first place, right? Instead of working at any other company. But then thirdly, your ability to go fast or go slow is entirely at the pleasure of the treasury of the new corporate entity. Because you're wholly owned, even if you're a separate legal entity, you don't have the luxury to go and raise debt finance, raise a new round, whatever the case might be. And so, I mean, if you want to keep pace, it probably goes back to the previous point, which is be really thoughtful and really intentional about how you can be indispensable to that corporate before you get there, because the extent to which you're indispensable is the extent to which you will get capital funding. If you're not, no one's going to take the risk, because to Renier's point, no one gets fired for spending money on SAP, but they will absolutely get fired for spending money on Simon if he screws it up.
Simon, you mentioned earlier the seasons of corporates, and that's the first time I've heard anyone speak about those kind of seasons, and it struck a chord with me because I think it does make sense. If there's a certain mood within an organization, certain things are easier to get done than other things. Can you maybe share like two extremes and perhaps how you can identify that and what it means for a startup?
Jeepers. You make me think. Haven't had to do that in a while. Yeah, so it's something that I don't have a strong framework for yet, but I feel like it feels like it's true, just purely from having lived through it. Like I've worked in different times in Massmart when it's felt like Massmart's had depression, and I've talked to people in different companies when it's felt like their business had depression, and then there's times when there's excitement and newness and growth. And I think if I can get somewhere close to a framework for it, I've spoken a bit about what I think burnout is before, and I'm first caveat applied here, not a doctor, okay? So please no one medicate based on this advice, but this is my idea. Everyone listening to this podcast has enough calories in the day. We have more than enough calories, right? Everyone here has got access to over 2,500. So burnout's not really a function of ATP being released by our cells. It's not a function of blood sugar. But there is still some kind of physical exhaustion that happens. And that is very similar to the kinds of signals that you get when you get depression, right? It's not like you're not getting enough sleep, but your body's telling you to sleep more. You feel exhausted. And that is in a realm where there's a lack of hope. There's a lack of, or there's a loss of hope rather. There's a loss of inspiration and motivation to go towards a goal that is achievable and exciting. Big enough to be exciting and scary, but not so big that it's not conceivably achievable. That happens in corporates when leadership changes too quickly, because different leaders arrive with different visions of what the future will be and then leave. So there's instability. The folks that remain behind no longer know which story to trust. Will this new parent be around? Should they even listen to their new vision and buy into it emotionally, or will it change? So there's kind of a hardness that develops towards even buying into anyone's vision. So leadership changing at the top can happen a lot. And then, of course, any time that a company has to go through any kind of restructuring, like an S189, that in of itself can result, I think, in this loss of hope, burnout, depression scenario. Obviously, because S189s suck, but more specifically because when a retrenchment or something like that happens on an organizationally wide scale, generally speaking, a lot of the folks who are the brightest, most excited, most ambitious people don't like that level of instability and will look around for other jobs, and so will leave the organization. And so the people who are culturally leading the cheer for the vision, for the ambition, for the future of the business are not there anymore. And you lose the fizz, you lose the excitement, you lose the spark. And the folks that are left are maybe the more introverted, deep workers who really benefit from somebody who's colorful and sparky and believes in the vision. And in the absence of it, and in this, and you add in leadership change to that, you can get a mood where it feels like I don't really know whether to step forward, step back, step sideways. I don't want to. This place feels unsafe, and also I don't really know what the vision is for this thing. And so when I'm asked to work these 12-hour days now instead of the 8 because we don't have enough people because we had to downsize, I feel more exhausted by that than excited and thrilled. Like I know, Rinya, you're talking about the fact that you're now writing this, like working 12 hours a day because you guys are your newsletter is growing like gangbusters, right? Yeah, obviously you're probably pretty buggered by that, but you're also probably freaking thrilled by that. So the 12 hours doesn't feel exhausting and depressing. It you're probably off your feet, but it's not like, ugh. And it's the only difference between your 12 hours now and the 12 hours of somebody who's like maybe depressed and hopeless and burnt out at the end of that is that you believe that there's a bigger, brighter, more interesting future at the end of your 12 hours than that person does.
Yeah. And I mean, if you spot that as a startup, I mean, you can find corporates that are probably good partners in the next season that you're going into, right? And I think that's where it gets interesting. Like if you can figure out whether or not there's optimism or depression, you can capitalize on that by going after the ones that are in more optimistic space than the ones that are in the depressed space.
Totally. And we did that, but not intentionally. And so, like, I think if anyone listens to this, is the opportunity is you can look for it. You can see signals, and you can benefit from it if you did intentionally. In our case, we got lucky.
So Wumdrop is a few years ago now. You obviously transitioned out of it. And like we said, it sounds like you are just a natural entrepreneur and you've got things coming up. What are the biggest lessons? It's a cliche question, but I mean, for someone that started and was using personal loans to pay salaries, using innovative tech in the time, to emerge and to an exit, it's quite a story, and obviously in the South African context. But what is the biggest lesson that you would absolutely take into your next startup, and that for a founder should be also thinking about when they're starting or early in their journey?
I left with a couple of lessons, but always whenever this kind of question gets asked, two things jump at me immediately. So they must be the things I feel the most about. The first is, as a completely chaotic, untrained, incompetent, like just try things human being, I had probably somewhere between a distaste for and a disdain for what I regarded as the boring thing of management, right? And frameworks and stuff. And having gone through reporting to a Walmart senior vice president directly and having my butt thoroughly kicked for the first few months of that, and then having frameworks and processes taught to me, I am really in love with management now. I fully appreciate not only that management and leadership are different things, because they was one revelation to me, but secondly, that they're twin flames and really they are both unsustainable without each other. Leadership is the ability to conceive of a vision that's interesting, that inspires people and motivates people to follow it towards that vision. And I think I always had a natural bent towards that. But management is the reliable, repeatable translation of that vision into actual execution. And I think many people who are good at management believe that that leadership is not teachable, that it's only a talent, that there aren't frameworks for it, and vice versa. And what I learned is that's not the case at all. There are frameworks for both, and both are eminently learnable. And in fact, as an executive, you have to know both and have to be good at both. And if you aren't good at both, you are at best somebody that's going to disappoint people often if you're strong in leadership and ignore management. And if you're a manager, you're not going to have the ability to inspire people towards the good work that you are doing, and so you'll be irrelevant. You must be good at both. Is one great lesson that I learned from Sylvester. The second thing that I learned, I realized I always had this natural talent towards storytelling, and I knew from having studied TV script writing, and having told stories a lot professionally throughout my life, that there were structures to story, and that story is also a learnable thing. There are loads of different ways to tell stories. There are archetypes and so on. And so this is natural to me, and I exploit them, and I use them, and I definitely got further in business than I ought to have by virtue of being able to explain things effectively as stories. And I also think that folks who maybe don't come from creative arts think of stories as this kind of mercurial thing that some people have a talent for and some people don't, but they also are frameworks, and they are eminently learnable too. And I didn't learn this necessarily directly from Sylvester, but it's more realization that I've gotten since this experience, is that I think that storytelling as an executive skill set is massively undervalued and underrepresented in terms of teaching frameworks for executives. And I think is going to become increasingly important, especially if, I don't know what the future holds with regards to artificial generalized intelligence, but if there is a likelihood that management frameworks, which is the less creative, more kind of executional stuff, gets subsumed by artificial general intelligence, then what's left is really a lot of leadership and the need to explain a changing world to people, both of which is heavily reliant on storytelling. And so I think if you're an executive that is trying to future-proof yourself, you could do a lot worse than being intentional about learning storytelling and getting good at it as soon as possible.
I agree.
Well, that's what we do at the Open Editor, right, Renier? Tell stories, share the stories.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. Renier, any final questions for Simon before we wrap up? I mean, I feel like we've scratched the surface only, but anything that you'd like to just cover before we let him go?
No, this is really good, Simon. Well done on the journey. It's a fascinating story, and thanks for sharing your learnings.
Thanks, Neil. Appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, I must say the idea of selling something on Twitter, I wonder if it would work again, because you're doing your marketing while you're doing your selling. It's pretty brilliant, actually. But anyways,
you try it and you let me know. You're not going to be able to get me back there that easily.
Yeah, no, listen, yeah. Then we'll just leave it at that. Maybe there's something else, Signal or Blue Sky.
WhatsApp.
WhatsApp. Everything's WhatsApp these days. Anyway, Simon, it was great having you on, and well done on your journey with Wumdrop, and look forward to what you have. I know you've got a couple of things in the brew, and we'll definitely be following to see how those come along. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Bobby.